Hello, this is Geotech and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Acer VG280K 4K monitor. The first part of this video is mostly going to be an unboxing and review of the 4K monitor itself, and then the second part of this video is going to talk about the experience of using a 4K monitor, primarily on Linux, but also a little bit on Windows. I'm also going to be using a 1080p monitor as my second monitor and talk about the experience of using that with the 4K monitor and see how well they work together. So let's take a look. If you're enjoying my video, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, PeerTube, follow me on Odyssey. You could also support me on LiberaPay, Patreon, and by shopping at Earth Hero. See links in the description below. One of my main concerns with this monitor was because it was priced much lower than their competition. I definitely had questions and concerns about the build quality. From looking at the images, I couldn't really tell if the quality of the materials looked cheap or just low quality, but I'm happy to report that the monitor itself looks very nice and looks and feels pretty decent in terms of quality. This is a very triangular, cool looking stand here. Designed just for gamers, of course, with all the right angles. This is a VESA supported monitor. Doesn't come with much else. It comes with an HDMI cable and a power cord, just typical standard cables. But yes, here is the monitor itself, and it looks very good. It definitely looks a little bit more glossy than my other monitors, but usually with glossier monitors, the colors look more vibrant. I guess it's somewhat of a trade-off. There you can see the ports, and this does come with 2-watt speakers. So I just attached the mount here. Looks very good. The one interesting thing though is that the stand is a little bit short, especially compared to my monitor on the left-hand side here. This HP monitor has like a much higher stand, so it did take some time to get used to it, but once you're used to it, it honestly isn't too big a deal. You could always get a different mount if you want. And right off the bat, you notice that the colors are much more vibrant. I don't think the video will do it justice here, but the colors pop out more, and that's due to the monitor's SR 90% color gamut. Here's me playing a video on YouTube in 4K showing off Ratchet and Clank. And once again, the colors look just much more vibrant and pop out a lot more. Now, the interesting thing is that on Linux, it doesn't quite support HDR, but part of what HDR is, at least from what I've read, is a wider color gamut. I definitely notice a wider color gamut, hence the vibrant colors, but apparently full HDR support isn't officially supported on Linux quite yet. But again, I mean, you do notice the wider color gamut, so maybe some parts of HDR don't work officially, and I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. I mean, it is a work in progress. I did mention this does come with 2-watt speakers, and I decided to do a comparison between my external speakers and the speakers on the monitor here. You definitely notice the external speakers having a lot more bass. While these built-in speakers aren't bad, they're never going to sound as good as external speakers because their speakers themselves are pointing downward, and that creates kind of like this echoey effect. But I think they're still usable, and I personally enjoy having them as a backup just in case for whatever reason my external speakers stop working. So overall, for $300, this is a very good deal on this monitor, and I definitely recommend. I'll leave some links in the description below to an Amazon and a Newegg links, just if you wanted to purchase through there and support the channel. Now, when it comes to the 4K support on Windows and Linux, if we're just talking about using one 4K monitor on Windows, it works very well. Support for scaling is very top-notch, and I've had no issues testing it out on Windows just using one 4K monitor. On Linux, it mostly works out okay, but there's definitely going to be some programs that don't have the proper scaling. On top of that, there's some OSs like Elementary OS that doesn't support fractional scaling, but there's a good chance, especially if you're just using one monitor, that you may not need it, because usually for like a 28-inch monitor, setting it at 200% seems to look very good. So it may not be too much of an issue depending on your use case. There's a lot of programs that scale well, even if you set it at 200% at 4K. You know, Kdenlive seems to scale very well. OBS does as well. One program, of course, is GIMP. That does not scale well. And of course, you can fix like the fonts and the resizing of it in the settings, but it's kind of like an extra step, an extra hassle. On Steam usually does a good job recognizing the type of resolution and the scaling. Although you're going to run into an issue with certain games potentially that use windows like this Kingdom Rush game. The scaling on it is pretty tiny and the 200% scaling factor doesn't apply to it. So the game itself looks fine. It's just these little pop-up or game launch windows that don't scale well, but you can still click through them and launch the games just fine. So bear that in mind. So overall, if you're using a 4K monitor just by itself, even on Linux, you're going to have a pretty okay experience. Where things get a little tricky though is when you're using a 4K monitor alongside a second monitor. Specifically though, when it's a monitor that is not 4K. So with my setup, I have this 1080p high refresh rate monitor paired with this 4K Acer monitor. There are little quirks here and there you should keep in mind. So one of them is that unless you have fractional scaling out of the box, you're going to have a hard time, because I ran into this issue where I would set the scaling factor at 200% on the Acer monitor, and it would actually scale the other monitor at 200% as well. And that other monitor, or the second monitor, is 1080p only, so it zoomed everything up and it looked pretty terrible. I thought for a moment this was not going to be usable. But once I turned on fractional scaling and I went back and played around with the resolutions, I ended up not having any more issues. I can set the Acer monitor at 200% and leave the 1080p monitor at 100%, and it worked fine. I've noticed when I have it with this setup, there's little quirks, like sometimes for some reason the mouse will get stuck on the screen, as you can see there. It kind of surprised me because I saw it on the wallpaper here, and I thought it was part of the wallpaper until I refreshed or restarted my computer. So that's one little quirk there. Another little quirk is that the mouse will start flashing, and it'll make it kind of hard sometimes to click around things because it'll kind of like disappear in and out. You know, I guess kind of like a Proton, hence the Geoproton logo here. When I'm doing video editing, I'll sometimes set this monitor, this 4K monitor, to 1080p, just so I won't have to deal with those like little issues, because it does get kind of distracting when you're, you know, trying to produce some content here. Keep in mind that this only happens when you're using the 1080p monitor as a second monitor. Otherwise, if you're just using the 4K monitor by itself, then you don't have any of these issues with the mouse. Now, on the flip side, if you go to Windows, you don't get any of those glitches with the mouse or anything like that. But one thing it does is that if you move the window to the second monitor, it almost like scales down and up if you go back and forth, which is one of those things that could also get distracting. Strangely enough, on the Linux side of things, it doesn't do that. It's actually very smooth going back and forth, so that's nice. So overall, I think I am very happy with this 4K monitor and just the experience of 4K on Linux in general. Even if there's little minor annoyances, I think overall most people should be able to get by and enjoy the benefits of 4K. Just keep in mind the type of little quirks that Linux has on 4K right now, just in case it may impact your productivity more so than others. It's really going to depend on your use case. But let me know your thoughts. Do you already have a 4K monitor that you use on Linux or even Windows? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.